The term anarchy is one of the most misunderstood terms out there. It's actually very simple. In the same way that monarchy means rule by one person, anarchy means rule by no one. All it means is we don't have a ruling class. It doesn't mean every man for himself. It doesn't mean survival of the fittest. It doesn't mean we can't organize or can't cooperate. It just means none of us have special rights. None of us have the right to rule. Which basically none of us have an exemption from morality, because the way most of us behave, we already don't attack each other. We don't try to tax and regulate each other. As long as nobody's attacking us, we leave them alone. All anarchy says, all anarchists say is that same rule should apply to everybody, including the politicians, which would put them out of business, because you can't have a government. You can have an organization, but you can't have a government that isn't coercive and violent. So that's all it is. It's saying morality applies to everybody equally. People have to understand what it actually means to do away with government. They have these ideas in their head that if you don't have a ruling class, then you have chaos and mayhem. Removing government does not remove any of our know-how. It doesn't remove any of our manpower. It doesn't remove any of our resources. All it says is basically, if you have an idea for how you think something should work, you have to ask if other people like the idea enough to voluntarily go along with it. In other words, you don't have one person or one group of people who comes up with this master plan and forces it on everybody. You can have a million different people with a million different ideas, and you get to decide which idea you want to go along with, which idea you want to fund, which plans you want to participate in, and that's all it means. Now, the downside is that the honest answer to the question, how will everything work without a government, is I don't know. If I did know, I should be running the world. I can't possibly know the best way to run anything. Neither can any government in the world. I can, however, looking back at history, see that we have 1,000 times better chance of doing things peacefully and effectively if you don't have a centralized master plan forced on everybody by way of government, if you let people decide how to voluntarily interact and organize, they'll come up with a million solutions that I wouldn't have thought of and you wouldn't have thought of, and we get to decide which ones we want to go along with instead of being forced to go along with whatever bogus ideas that the politicians come up with and compel us to cooperate with. There's the cliche of the guy wearing black and a mask with a Molotov cocktail. I suppose there are some who might think that way. Of the thousands of anarchists I know, they aren't that. They understand that what has to change is not a regime being overthrown, it's a bad idea being overthrown. And you can't overthrow an idea with bullets and bombs. The way people look at society has to change, because if people still believe that we need a ruling class, if they still believe that government is legitimate and necessary, then knocking over what we have now, you would just get a repeat, probably something worse. That's happened over and over again in history, where you have a revolution and what comes out the other side is worse than what people were complaining about to begin with. What really has to change is people have to stop thinking that we need masters and rulers and controllers. And when that mindset changes, you don't even need a revolution. If the people of the world looked at government and said, you're not our boss, you don't have the right to tell us to do anything, go away, you don't even need a revolution. You could literally ignore them out of existence. So the revolution that has to happen, the only permanent revolution, as opposed to revolution going around in circles, is a revolution of the mind where people stop trying to get the right guy on the throne, because most of human history has been that, like, we need to get the right people in power ruling the world. No, you need to figure out that we need nobody ruling the world. We need nobody on the throne. We need the throne to not be there. I consider it 100% inevitable that all of humanity is going to be anarchistic or voluntaristic in the hopefully not too distant future. Now, I don't know the exact timeline, but the reason I say it's inevitable is because it's very easy to prove that it is impossible to believe in government without having contradictions inside your own head. I accidentally became an anarchist just by reconsidering my own position, because I believed in government and law and order by way of an authoritarian ruling class. I wouldn't have described it that way. All I did to accidentally end up where I am is whittle away the contradictions and say, well, I don't have the right to force my neighbor to fund something just because I want it if they don't. Like, I can ask them, but I don't have that right. And I can't delegate to politicians a right I don't have. So if they only have the rights I have, I can't tax my neighbor. They can't tax my neighbor. It was just a matter of going through the basic ideas and realizing anarchy is what is. Government is just an illusion. It's a lie that we were taught to believe. And we were taught to believe it because it serves the people in power. We were taught to believe that constitutions and elections and all these rituals can actually give superhuman rights, the right to rule, to mere mortals. And if you think about it enough, you realize that's utterly impossible. So I got here by accident. I didn't even, it wasn't a matter of thinking, well, which would work better, having a government or not having a government. I got here realizing there can't be legitimate government. And it's actually pretty easy to prove. And because it's that easy to prove, eventually the whole world will know it. And once the whole world knows it, they're not going back to this superstition we have now. Now, in the meantime, those in power may make things get rather ugly. So I want it to happen as fast as it possibly can. But I think it is absolutely inevitable that humanity is going to end up giving up the superstition of authority in government.